AI is not good at strategic decision making. AI is good at telling you trends in your data and making charts for you, right? You still have to make those decisions. You're just making those decisions as a more informed person.
What data are they using in esports? These I
A
typically
lot.
see teams of 5 young kids playing shoot 'em ups against each other.
The way that they were using data, at least on the team when I joined, was very much predicting like play patterns of the enemy team that were predictable. And so by adding these conditions and filtering the data in a certain way, you can get to you know, shiny red dots on the heat map as opposed to big green areas. And that's where you can start to predict where your enemy is going to be and gain an unfair advantage. Let's say in a typical week, you could ask your data scientist to do 2 things for you. Well, with AI, you could ask the AI to do 15, 20 things for you, right? And so you're just able to get through more, way more efficiently. When you look at AI generated music, for example, it's music. It sounds like, especially if you ask for like country music or metal, it sounds like country, it sounds like metal, but it's not good. It's not, there's no there's nothing unique or creative about it. It's just kind of exactly what you would expect the average country song to sound like.
Welcome to the Product Development Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Wakeling, and in this episode, I am joined by Mo Hallaba, who is the CEO of Datawisp, an AI-based tool that helps non-technical people get deep data insights from their product. In this episode, we'll be exploring the challenges of data-informed decision-making, how AI can help solve some of these challenges, but also the limitations of AI. Before we begin the episode, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use, make sure to hit the follow button, and if you like the episode, leave a review, as it really helps grow the podcast and ensure we get great guests in the future. Also, head over to YouTube and subscribe to the Product Development Podcast channel, where there's bonus content available and where you can also watch the podcast and not just listen. But without further ado, please enjoy the episode with Mo Hallaba. Mo, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about product analytics and data and AI and all that fun stuff.
Do you want to just give a bit more of a background in terms of your history? Just give the sort of 2-minute tour about where you've come from to where you are now at CEO of Datawisp.
Sure. So I actually started my career in finance, kind of number crunching and digging through a lot of data. First in equity research and then in corporate M&A and strategy. So spent a lot of time doing stuff that at the time I felt could better be done by a robot. Um, Simply because it was just repeated tasks over and over, with a very clear goal at the end, right? And then from there, I left to jump into entrepreneurship. I started a startup in the gaming space, that didn't work out as I had hoped, but in the process, met some really great co founders that I'm working on Datawisp with now. And at the time, they were running an esports team, very competitive gaming, and they were taking a very data analytics moneyball approach to running the organization, which I found really interesting. And then that kind of led to the data side of the business being spun out, other teams wanting to license the software, and then that grew into a software thing. And then we ended up thinking outside of just esports and gaming and building something that could be used by anyone, which is how we ended up with Datawisp. So it's been a little bit of an unconventional journey, but here I am.
What was the gaming side that kind of was interesting because what data are they using in esports? These I
A
typically
lot.
see teams of 5 young kids playing shoot 'em ups against each other, but what sort of data are they looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at how kids would train in CS:GO, Counter-Strike, which is, one of the big titles at the time, it was a lot of repetitive grinding, just play lots of games, train your aim really good, practice. But it wasn't a lot of using data in a clever way to gain an unfair advantage. And so the way that they were using data, at least on the team when I joined, was very much predicting like play patterns of the enemy team that were predictable using data. And so when you kind of look at a general heat map of where players position themselves. They can kind of just be anywhere in any given circumstance, and so the heat map just kind of looks like a bit greenish everywhere, and it's not really useful. But then when you start to filter down to certain scenarios, right? So you can say, okay, well, the first round of the game is different in Counter Strike because they have pistols, not guns, right? And so pistol rounds look very different. So if you filter by pistol rounds, all of a sudden the positions look, a bit more actionable. If you filter to when they've got sniper rifles, the guy who's holding the sniper rifle definitely stands in a different place than he would normally, right? And so by adding these conditions and filtering the data in a certain way, you can get to like, you know, shiny red dots on the heat map as opposed to big green areas. And that's where you can start to predict where your enemy is going to be and gain an unfair advantage using data. And so that's what they were doing. And remember, there was one tournament where 6 of the top 8 were all using the same software to train on each other. So
That's great. I mean, you mentioned their unfair advantage, and I think that is what every business is looking for, right? It's that unfair advantage in the
yeah.
market, and it's very much applies to esports as well as SaaS companies or whoever. So, DataWisp, my understanding is it's very much targeted at non-technical users to be able to get rich data insights to help make better decisions. I think essentially, to kind of paraphrase your positioning statement. But in terms of the problem space, then in terms of what you're trying to solve in the market, what do you think are the main problems right now in non-technical people wanting to get informed insights from data and build better products, iterate better cycles, as well as just feel more comfortable what they're doing is the right thing?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is just the technical ability of people to do that is very limited. And so they have to depend on technical people who can do it for them, like a data scientist. There's not very many data scientists and they're expensive. And so any company that wants to take a data approach to building their product kind of can't do that unless they can afford to hire someone. Also, even if you can afford to hire a data scientist, usually it's one or two, and then you have this massive queue of requests from different parts of the business, and people are usually waiting, a couple of weeks to a month to get the data that they need to make decisions, and then those decisions lag, and it's just not as efficient as they can. The other symptom of this is that because there's not a lot of people who are data literate, and because there is this issue, companies don't invest as much as they should in having good, clean, organized data. And so it's like a negative flywheel where every part of this makes the other part worse. And so with Datawisp, what we're hoping to do is, because it allows non-technical people to be able to ask questions directly about the data and get the answers immediately, it kind of incentivizes the data teams or the just engineering teams to gather more data, keep it clean, et cetera, because it's useful now because people can actually do something with it, not just the data scientists. And so now you have more clean data available for people to make decisions off, and you can make better decisions, et cetera. So it's like the opposite of the negative flywheel.
Yeah. On the technical side, do you think that where we're going is a place where the traditional product management technical foundations, whether it's using MySQL in order to generate insights from the database, or being able to generate certain things in Python, maybe? Do you think the need for that is probably going to reduce into the future, where it's more about knowing how to write great prompts and working with AI tools opposed to that technical foundation, ignoring the fact of the challenge about communicating to engineers? But that aside, in terms of the data side, I guess, do you think things will look very different in the next 2 to 3 years on that side?
Sure. I think what AI is doing is it's removing a lot of the technical barriers to be able to work on some of these problems internally for companies. And so right now, if you want to dig into data, you have to know SQL, or you have to know whatever your company is doing, right? And so this means only certain people can help solve the problem, right? But with AI, we can remove that technical barrier so that 5 times as many, 10 times as many people can help solve the problem. We can move faster. I still think there's value in people having these skills, right? But we're just targeting the ones who don't have them.
Ignoring the technical skills, what other problems and challenges do you think PMs or other similar teams, research teams who aren't technical, let's
Yeah.
say, um, what are the challenges around data? Are there kind of key pillars that you're thinking about as you're trying to make a very intuitive interface?
Yeah.
What are the key pillars of data? Do you think, and how people the challenges in getting the right data to make the right decisions? Because I know that data can also lead to the wrong conclusions. So,
Yeah.
what are your
Yep.
thoughts
Yep.
there?
So I think just because of the technical limitation, a lot of people just don't think about data. They go, well, that's not, we have a data science team, they handle all that stuff. So they're not trained to thinking about data and using data correctly. Like you said, you can make the wrong conclusions from looking at data. Someone who never looks at data, who looks at data one time is more likely to to get the wrong conclusion from that. But if you introduce a culture of caring about data and understanding, how these things work and um, correlation and causation and things like that, then you reduce that. So culturally within the company, there needs to be data awareness, and when you remove technical barriers, you allow that. The other thing is some people, because they're not used to working with data, something we hear a lot is I don't even know what questions to ask because there's just like it's just not a skill set that they've
Mm,
um, trained over the years. When someone is able to just write SQL, they can have a curiosity about the data. They can go, well, what about this? What about that? But if you've never been someone who is able to ask questions about the data, you haven't thought about what questions you have. And so one of the things that we built into Datawisp was as soon as you import a data set, it automatically just generates a bunch of random questions that you could ask about that data set just to kind of like inspire people to start thinking. So it's things like that.
so, what sort of questions would they be then? What are the fundamental things that you might be asking if you upload a CSV of a load of metadata on something?
So it really depends what kind of data you're looking at, but so the scooter data set is the one that we use in all our demos, and it's basically a fake scooter app where you can use your app to book a scooter, and then you could ride it a certain distance. And so what the um, what the AI does is basically it looks at the data set and it goes, "Hey, I'm a data analyst at this company. I'm looking for interesting trends in this data. Can you suggest some things that might be worth looking at?" And the AI understands that you're a scooter company, and it knows what a scooter is, and it knows how they work and what people expect when they're riding a scooter and all these things. And it's able to just kind of generate some questions that make sense. So what's the average distance of a scooter ride? How often do people use the app? What percentage of the time that someone opens the app do they end up riding a scooter? Like, the AI is really good at coming up with these kinds of questions. And so, a feature that we're working on actually is kind of taking all those questions and just automatically running them and getting a dashboard that just shows like 10 different charts about the data. And if you look through these 10 charts, eventually you find one that looks a little odd. It's like, oh, why does this city have way more X than that one? And then you can start asking questions specifically about the data in that chart. And that's how you uncover insights that you didn't have before.
Mm. It's like a analytics detective assistant just sitting there,
Yeah.
feeding you clues, and some of them are maybe red herrings, but some are worth pursuing. I guess that's the idea.
That's some of the thing that's one of the things about working with data that often is overlooked is that you don't always know what you're looking for, and especially if you're just trying to increase efficiency, right? Sometimes you have to do this exploration, which is let me just look through the data I have and see if there's anything interesting in here, and ask a bunch of questions until I land on something. A lot of people ask when we talk to them about DataWisp, they go, "What insights does it give me?" Or and that's kind of the wrong way to think about it. It's not you push a red button and your sales go up, right? It's more of this allows you to ask questions and explore the data you have, and you may
Mhm.
find something that lets you increase your sales.
Yeah, I guess one of the big things for me is the challenge between knowing when there's just a correlation and when there's actually causation. And I think that's
Mhm.
a big challenge. I mean, how can AI help with that in terms of really understanding when something is just a correlation or when something actually directly causes it?
I think so what AI does is it speeds up the cycle. So in let's say in a typical week, you could ask your data scientist to do 2 things for you. Well, with AI, you could ask the AI to do 15, 20 things for you, right? And so you're just able to get through more, way more efficiently. And ultimately, Datawisp doesn't tell you how to run your business, right? AI is not good at strategic decision making. AI is good at telling you, trends in your data and making charts for you, right? You still have to make those decisions. You're just making those decisions as a more informed person.
So, what is it about the AI or the application of AI that means that it's not particularly good, or at least it's not better than humans at the strategic piece? What is it about that that is
Well,
still,
so there's
my job is safe?
so I mean, there are far more intelligent people than me when it comes to discussing, what AI is good and bad at. I think that there's an element of human creativity that allows us to problem solve in a way that AI is not, able to yet. And I think you see that when you I think we spoke about this a little bit, but when you look at AI generated music, for example, it's music. It sounds like, especially if you ask for like country music or metal, it sounds like country, it sounds like metal, but it's not good. It's not, it's, there's nothing unique or creative about it. It's just kind of exactly what you would expect the average country song to sound like. And I think when it comes to problem solving, your problem might be unique in a way that the data that the AI is trained on hasn't experienced before, and the AI is not going to be able to solve that problem for you. It's just going to be able to suggest a bunch of generic things that other people have tried. For example, if you go to ChatGPT, right, and you say, "Hey, I have a company called Datawisp, and I need to raise my Series A round, and funding environment is really difficult right now. How would you suggest that I raise my Series A?" It's going to be like, "Well, have you tried talking about the pros and cons of your product? Have you tried, making a pitch and talking to some VCs?" It's not going to come up with anything creative on its own.
So yeah, we mentioned in the pre-call about the AI generated music, and I kind of go backwards and forwards because on one side, I definitely don't see the creativity from generative AI yet, at least, and that's kind of convincing me otherwise. But I do think about, as a guitarist in my spare time, I think about when I'm creative playing guitar. I think a lot of it is from influences from other people. So really, what I'm doing is I'm borrowing a little kind of riff idea from that guitarist, or I'm taking another idea from a different musician, and I'm bringing them all together and creating something kind of unique in that mix of influences. And I wonder, on the counter side, maybe AI could kind of do that, where it takes these influences and creates something new
It can.
as that idea, and creative. But
But the difference is, like, well, I guess it's not necessarily different, but when you look at the average bedroom guitarist, right? The average bedroom guitarist is able to draw from their influences, but the average bedroom guitarist is not good. Like, they're not gonna be successful musicians. They're just and there's a difference between, like, creating something original from your influences and creating something that is very good that other people want to listen to, right? And so the AI is able to draw from influences and create something that kind of fits the formula, but it's not good. And lots of people don't want to listen to that, right? I think when you hear Jimi Hendrix, when you hear Stevie Ray Vaughan, we're talking about guitarists now, but when you hear Slash, when you hear, all the guitar legends, they all had a thing that, they all had influences too, but they added their own thing to it that nobody else was doing, that made them unique, that made them worth listening to over somebody else. The AI is not able to do that.
yeah, it's the
At
influences
least not yet.
plus that little extra secret sauce being into the
Yeah,
mix. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Um, so yeah, not to kind of derail too much the conversation towards the pros and cons of music AI, but I think sticking to that problem space, we've talked about the challenges around strategic decision making with AI, but the technical ability of people and usage of data, um, the challenge around investing in clean, organized data as well. You kind of touched upon. Is there anything else around the problem space and some of the challenges that people have working with data that is worth mentioning before we think about what's out there and what you're working on in terms of solving those data problems?
I think there's a lot of, like, "This is the way we do things here," that still needs to get changed. You don't see this as much with young tech companies, but with bigger enterprises, you can. And I think it's going to take a while to uproot all of that kind of resistance to change, or, oh, we don't trust the AI, or we don't trust, people make mistakes all the time, right? That's one thing that people forget. We're seeing a lot of people who are a little on the fence about some AI stuff because it can make mistakes, right? But humans can make mistakes. And so you really need to understand at what rate it makes mistakes, when it
Mm.
does make mistakes, what they look like, what the company's doing to allow you visibility into what those mistakes are and how you correct them. And for some people, they're just saying, "No, I don't want to deal with that." I think that will change. Obviously, otherwise, I wouldn't be building the business that I'm building. But it's definitely one of the elements that
Can you
we're
think of any
talking about.
yeah, can you think of any ways that for someone who's working in a, I assume maybe not a tech startup because that's probably a bad example, but maybe a slightly more traditional product based company which has a lot of scope for innovation and growth with data and AI, whatever else it could be. I mean, how do you think about convincing leadership, let's say, that it's worth pursuing these things in an environment where you haven't quite got the buy in yet to do it?
I think there's a lot of businesses and, like, media and publishing and things like that that have been where the business model hasn't really changed for a long time. And they're still on Excel and looking at things manually and sending insights via emails to their boss, and it's very slow, and these industries are becoming increasingly dynamic. Everything's moving online, and you just need faster turnaround time. You need to be able to detect trends faster, and what's cool and what people want to watch, and you need to be first to market with some of these things. And um especially when you're talking about, like, IP deals, especially exclusive IP deals. Now, if you spot a trend and you're able to negotiate exclusive IP rights for that thing, and create content with it, I think that can be really powerful. But if you're not looking at the right data, or you're not moving fast enough, somebody's going to beat you to that.
So moving to the solutions space side of things, we talked about a bit of the landscape in terms of the problems, but what solutions should be people thinking about in terms of data? Obviously, Datawisp is one solution, but let's say you are a product person who is overwhelmed by the amount of data they've got. They've got Google Analytics report everywhere. They've got their own maybe first party data collection and usage data and engagement data and all this sort of thing.
Mhm.
And they're thinking about either UI changes, UX changes, or strategies to try and improve retention levels. Maybe they want to save some costs. What are you thinking about when it comes to the solution side?
So, what we've seen is, first, people need to identify what their biggest pain point is, right? Maybe it's top of funnel, maybe it's this part of my website isn't converting how I want. Maybe it's, if you're building a video game, the first level retention is really low. People aren't progressing to the second level. So you kind of need to figure out what that is like your biggest area where you're losing potential business. Because at the end of the day, this is all to make money, right? Like, nobody's just trying to make a product better yeah, because it makes them smile and go home happy. People are doing it because they want to get more customers, and so you got to figure out where you're losing the most customers. And the way that you do that is through data exploration. So you need a tool that kind of allows you to look at everything that you do collect, and try to figure out where you're not converting or where people are dropping off the most. And if you're looking at your website, you can use Google Analytics for that, to understand what part of your website people are dropping off. If you're building a game, there's game specific analytics tools that exists that show you how people progress through your game and where they drop off and stuff. Um, but once you've identified kind of what that thing is, then you need tools to be able to leverage all the data that you have at the same time, and be able to use all of it, because sometimes one data set doesn't tell the whole story, right? And so I'll give you an example. We're working with this one company. It's a mobile game, and they are in the process of increasing their user base by looking at what people do in the game and then going back to the acquisition source for that player and saying, "Oh, this was a good acquisition source because they exhibited behavior that leads to." Once they started playing, they had these behaviors that we like, that we think encourages long-term, player growth, and they came from this traffic source. So we're gonna boost spend on that traffic source, and we're gonna decrease some of these other ones, right? And you can't do that if your tool only looks at one data set. And so what I see a lot of non-technical PMs using are these like SaaS tools that are like pseudo data, right? But the problem is they can only see their own data. So Google Analytics can only see the data it collects, right? AppsFlyer only sees the data it collects, right? And so you need something that can use all your data, and allow you to see what you're missing by siloing all that stuff. We have a solution that I think does that, but there's other ones too.
Mm. Is this the power of generative AI as well in being able to have it connected to things which aren't just your own platform? So, you plug in data and it's obviously feeding insights from elsewhere in sort of real time in terms of,
So
yeah.
generative AI has an understanding of the world. And so you can ask questions. One of the things that we did with the scooter data set, for example, we asked it, do people ride scooters more on hot days than cold days? Right? And in our data set, the cities were London, New York, and Arizona. Or not Arizona, it was Phoenix. Right. London, New York, and Phoenix. Right. And obviously a hot day in Phoenix is very different than a hot day in London. Right. And it was able to use its own knowledge of what the weather is like in London and in Phoenix to actually set different thresholds for each city of what constitutes hot or not hot. So you do have access to a bit of like the AI's like world knowledge.
Yeah, it's really valuable, particularly for product teams, having that contextualized data in the environment you're working in. And you don't have to rely on a specific, let's say, metadata point in order to capture that information. It really powers, yeah, the decision making process.
Because typically what like back when I was working in finance, for example, you know, I would have had to do something like, what's the average weather in London for the last 10 years so I can go back and look at what is a hot day in but AI can just do that. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So, giving a more specific example, let's say I'm a product manager and I'm trying to improve the design of a page to increase retention levels, reduce bounce rate, whatever else it could be. What kind of things could people do with Datawisp that will generate some insights around that kind of case example?
Sure. So we actually used it on our own UI a while back. So I can give you our
Mm,
story of what we did.
great.
Essentially, when people log into Datawisp, we expect them to do certain things, right? So it's a data analysis platform. We expect them to upload data. We expect them to analyze that data. We expect them to click on Wispy, our agent, and ask it questions. We expect them to create new sheets and dashboards and things like that. And so first thing we're able to do is just go, what percentage of people uploaded data, right? And we found that it was really low. And we go, okay, well, we're a data analysis platform and only, 10% of people are uploading data. What could be the problem, right? And then so we start looking at where buttons are and what user loops look like. And we're able to, this we did a bit manually outside of but this is why you have a data scientist, right? So one person like non-technical like me can identify that there's a problem that not enough people are uploading data, and then a data scientist can kind of dig into like user journeys and stuff and figure out what people are doing when they log in. The other thing that we did in parallel was we ran something called user testing. It's actually a website, usertesting.com, where you're able to just watch people using your product. And so we realized that actually the process of importing data into Datawisp was not easy. There was just like a couple of buttons people weren't finding intuitive. And so we were able to, based on the most common failure methods, we were able to redesign that in a way that was intuitive. And then later when you ask the same question, you can see that number trending up. And so now when you go into Datawisp, almost everyone's importing data and they're moving on to the later. And so we go, okay, now they're importing data. How many people are asking questions of the AI? How many people are clicking the dislikes the answer button? How many people are doing this? And so that's how we work through it.
I think being able to see people use your product in real time is a really powerful piece of data as well. I remember looking at Hotjar, which is something I've used before, which
Yeah,
is kind of similar
we've
to user
used it too.
testing. Yeah, it's really good. And what I found really fascinating is that looking at the data in Google Analytics on your website, for example, comparing that to a real person doing stuff and moving their mouse in real time and saying, that doesn't really make sense. Why is that person doing that? But obviously, in their head, it's the right thing to do. But me, as someone who's
Exactly.
seen the website for years and years and years, everything makes sense. But with fresh eyes, it's a very different experience. And yeah, some people take completely different user journeys than I would.
Mhm.
And having that data is super interesting to segment those people too.
I think, yeah, there's a couple of things there to explore a little further. I think one, you have a very different understanding of your product than the average user because you spend all day looking at it. And you know what you care about, and you know what you worked hard on to put. And somebody who is just showing up doesn't know what you spent the most time on. They don't know what you want them to click on. They just see what's in front of them and they take their own path, right? High level data analysis can be really useful here because you can quickly understand if people are doing what you expect them to do. And so there's data is just not going to tell you what to do, but based on data and also based on your expectations of what they should be doing, you can kind of compare if your expectations match up with reality. And if they don't, then you have options to dig in further and figure out why that's the case. So for us, we found that expectation didn't match in terms of the number of people that were uploading. And then we said why. And then so we were able to look at things like Hotjar and stuff like that to dig in a little bit more.
One thing I like doing as well with new people who join the company I work for is pretty early on get some feedback from them about our content management system and how they use it because they haven't been using it for months on end. They're not used to the quirks and maybe little bugs that happen occasionally. And
Yeah.
getting their objective view is really useful. So I recommend that to people if they aren't leveraging new users in the company early on.
Absolutely. You can only get that first impression once from someone before it's gone. So
Yeah. In terms of some common pitfalls you may see people do in terms of some of this data driven UX design, what are some possible issues that people might find leveraging AI for those insights that we haven't touched upon already?
I think the biggest pitfall, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about it, but not. I think the biggest pitfall is just assuming that the data is going to do your job for you, or that it's going to give you all the answers. At the end of the day, the data analysis tool is a tool that gives you information, that you can leverage to do your job, which is to solve the problem,
Mm,
right? And I think this idea of like, we like to call it data informed decision making, not data driven decision making, because the data doesn't make the decisions. You make the decisions.
In terms of the data being used and collected, does generative AI mixed into your own data negate the need to get very, very granular in terms of the metadata you're collecting? Or do you think there's still a lot of value in making sure that you're collecting all the data points?
I think the better the data that you collect, the more the AI can do with it. And the even so we have a feature called a data dictionary in Datawisp where you can go in and I mean data dictionaries are pretty common, but in Datawisp specifically, we have the option to edit the dictionary for every field in your data and add metadata and stuff like that. It makes a huge difference
Mm,
with how the AI is able to answer questions about it. I'll give you an example. We have a data set that is it's just a like a heartbeat. Like every time somebody spends a minute in the product, it puts an entry with that person and the timestamp and whether they were active or idle.
mm,
And that's it. That's the whole data set. And so it's just millions of rows of just this user ID, this timestamp, active or idle, right? And if you ask questions like, what are my daily active users or whatever, AI has no idea. But as soon as you go in that data dictionary and you say, hey, every minute we record whether a user is active or idle in the product, full stop, right? You add that to the data dictionary, and now it's able to answer any
mm.
number of questions about daily active users, retention, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So it does make a huge difference. So I think spending time on collecting really good data, cleaning it up, adding tons of metadata to help the AI, um, super valuable investment.
What does the future look like then? You've developed this product with Data Wisp, but outside of where you are now, where are you positioning to anticipate going into in the future? Where do you think things are going to end up in 2, 3 years time? What are your thoughts about the next few years?
So I think there's going to be a big shift towards adoption of AI at the enterprise level. Right now, there's certain tools that people are using and stuff, but they're mostly in, you know, fields where there's no objective right or wrong answer. So you see tools like Photoshop AI or Midjourney or Jasper, things like that being used where there's no right answer. You know, the AI can just kind of do something and you can use it as a basis. In analytics specifically, there is a right answer. If I asked you how many people are on this call right now, it's two, and every other answer is wrong. And so I think we'll see more adoption of AI in areas like this, like where the AI has to be exactly correct. Um, and I think that'll take a little bit of time, but people will realize that one, humans also make mistakes from time to time. And two, it's just incredibly efficient, even if you have a 10, 20%, 30% error rate, right? As long
Mm.
as the tool is able to indicate what it's doing, and you can spend a couple minutes just, making sure the AI did the right thing, it still saves time. Right. So one of the things that we focused on when we built Datawisp was having a visual system for the AI to be able to communicate to you what it did, so that if the answer seems wrong, you can go and say, "Hey, I don't think this is what I wanted, and here I can see it made an error because it used this column instead of that column." Right. Whereas ChatGPT now, if you use it, it's just a black box. It doesn't explain anything to you. It just kind of tells you here,
Yeah,
here's an answer. And I don't think enterprises will use that.
yeah, lack of sources attributed and transparency as well. I think it's a huge part
It's
of.
getting better at attributing sources, like so it can do that with various forms of like RAG now, but it's more about the thinking or the logic steps that it took to do something. And
Mm,
right now, if you're doing data analysis, the only way to explain what it did is by printing out a bunch of SQL, which we've already decided that most people don't know how to read, right? So
yeah.
you've got to find another way to do it.
I think the basic knowledge is still a really good thing to improve on, just so you know when you put data into, let's say, these AI based products, which can create data insights for you or help you find some conclusions, that you can ask better questions. You can understand what it's talking about when it's talking about certain trends, maybe, or so I think it's definitely, yeah, it's not a substitute completely for some technical understanding.
I think the biggest thing that I see is PMs who are asking, well, can Datawisp tell me this or tell me that? And there are things that show that they clearly have no understanding of how AI or databases or anything works, just even at a really basic level. I'll give you an example, right? Um, let's say that you have data that people entered. Let's say they took a quiz, right? And one of the fields is just long form entry, so people can write whatever they want, right? And so we have a lot of people that ask, well, can Datawisp tell me who answered the question correctly? And so, but if you think about it, in order for the AI to do that, the AI would have to read every single response one by one, right? And
Mm,
that's not how. So if you copy and pasted all your data into ChatGPT, it would be able to do that. But if you have a billion rows in Snowflake, you can't do that. So obviously, Datawisp doesn't work like that. It doesn't work by just feeding all your data into an AI, right? It works by something they call text to SQL now, which is you type a question, it comes up with a SQL query that would answer your question if you ran it, and then Datawisp does a bunch of magic and then runs it, and then you get your answer, right? And so at no point is every single entry fed into the AI. So it's impossible to answer that question. But that PM has no idea because they don't understand that. I think that's a really easy place for people to just start educating themselves, is just understand how LLMs work, understand how databases work, and things like that.
what are some final pieces of advice you can give product people, non-technical people who want to use data to improve products? What are some final thoughts you can leave them with to really move forward and either prepare them effectively to use this sort of information well? What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of people tend to think, oh, we're too early to care about data. We don't really do anything. We just have a basic dashboard that shows like daily active users, whatever. I would say as soon as you have a functioning product, start tracking everything because it gives you an ability to dig into your product and how people are using it in a way that is just so efficient. Having to go through 100 hotjar videos to identify trends that you could get just with one question to an AI is so inefficient. Right, and we used to do that. So we used to look at user testing over and over and over and over to find these trends that, once we started collecting data about how people were using our product, we were able to just find those trends in the data and not have to waste that time. So I'd say that one, that's super important, and two, like if you develop that culture really early on of double checking expectation versus reality, I think that lets you craft the experience that you want in your product in a way where um, you're always certain that when you are changing something, it's having the desired effect, or that you can focus on creating the best possible experience for your user without worrying about are they experiencing it the way that I'm intending them to.
Yeah, there's so many components that we could talk about and tangents and in the discussion of data. There's lots of rabbit holes which we can go down, but unfortunately, you're run out of time. But yeah, in terms of Datawisp and yourself, where can people find out more about your company online?
Sure. So datawisp.io is our website. You can find our company on LinkedIn or on Twitter, just at Datawisp. And then same for me. You can find me just searching my name, or on Twitter, I'm Electronic Mo.
Great. Well, I'll leave links
So
down below in the show notes and the description on YouTube as well. So, Mo, thank you very much. It's been yeah, fascinating, and look forward to talking again hopefully. So, thanks a lot for joining.
yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure.
You've been watching or listening to the Product Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a like, share with your colleagues, follow on your preferred podcast platform. I'll see you in the next episode.